Meet the Kebtek 5-inch mini electric chainsaw. Let's have a bit of fun, compare it to these two and see if it's any good. I know, some idiot gave me a chainsaw, right? Hey. So for today's review, I'm going to compare the little Kebtek to the Stihl GTA 26 and my old Ryobi pole saw, just for a point of comparison. Starting with the Ryobi, I've been reasonably well impressed with not only the performance but the flexibility of this little saw. And no more climbing ladders. Seriously, everyone needs a pole saw. I just happened to get a Ryobi because someone gave me some cheap power tools for Christmas, and it's been surprisingly good quality and very useful. Having said that, we did end up with the engine smoking a little bit a few weeks ago because we used 3 batteries in series without a break. These little tools are not designed for that. They're designed for occasional work, and for that, pretty good. Now, any decent comparison or review should include some stats, but that's proved a little bit more difficult than I'd hoped. I'll explain to you why in a minute, but let's start out with the Kebtek because I've got a lot of information on this. To begin with, it's got a 450 watt brushless motor powered by 2 14-volt lithium-ion batteries that come in the pack. They run a 15.5 centimetre long bar that runs a tiny, tiny chain of 1/4 inch pitch. And listen to that build-up. That instant wind-up from that brushless motor is unmistakable, and the chain fairly flies around at 10 metres a second. Moving on to the Stihl. It's got a 3/8 pitch chain, which is more your classic type chain. The bar is only 10 centimetres long, so it's 1/3 shorter than the Kebtek. And the wind up from the motor is more gentle and a little bit softer. That leads me to believe that this is a brushed motor. I tried to find out a little bit more about the motor in the Stihl online, and I also went to our local Stihl dealer when I wasn't able to find out anything. He then went to Stihl themselves and still weren't able to tell him. So I just have to guess at what's in here. I did find one Stihl blog that talks about the motor, but they listed the GTA 26 motor as a 2-stroke. I'll put that blog up on the screen now so you can see it for yourself. It's hilarious. Hopefully they fix that because it's clearly wrong. This is an electric motor. And it just goes to show, if you're in marketing and you get ChatGPT to write your blogs for you, you better proofread them before you put them up. I'm going to perform the same cuts on the same branch with the 2 different saws and see if there's a difference in their performance. We're going to start out on this old fig tree, and we'll start out cutting it with the Stihl. Now, to operate the Stihl, all I've got to do is toggle down this little orange button here and pull the trigger. And you notice when I was pushing a little bit hard and it bogged down and stopped. I had to release pressure to get it going. Now we'll try the Kebtek, and I know I'm using the other hand, but I'll try and repeat the tension. Now with the Kebtek, you actually have to turn it on, which is a bit annoying because it turns itself off after a minute or 2. Then you have to press this little black button, then you can push the trigger. Now I was pushing probably a little bit harder to compensate, and it didn't bog down at all, and I think it was actually a little bit quicker. Let's try that same cut again. Anyway, getting back to this saw, you only get the one 10-volt battery. You have the 10 centimetre long bar with a 3/8 pitch chain and a little bit more gentle acceleration. The Ryobi 3/8 pitch chain on a 20 centimetre bar, and once again it is a brushed motor with the oil injection. The new model is a brushless and it doesn't require oil injection either. To be honest with you, I prefer the old one because at least you know there's oil going on the bar, whereas with these saws you've got to remember to oil the bar every few cuts, which is annoying, and I guarantee you most people don't do that. Gumtree! No problem for the Kebtek. You've got to moderate the downward pressure on the Stihl a lot more. You can tell that the engine is not quite as powerful. That's why it gets away with a smaller battery for the same claimed number of cuts. Well, both of the manufacturers have a very similar claim for number of cuts per charge of battery, and I'm beginning to see why. The Stihl has a smaller battery, but it has a less powerful motor. You do have to moderate the Stihl a bit more through the cut. If you push too hard, it bogs down. If you feather it and listen to the motor, it's okay. Whereas the Keb Tech, it'll just keep going. Now, tightening the chain on these mini saws, we're going to start with the Ryobi because you need the most tools for this. You have to start out with a 10mm socket. So if your kids own motorbikes, they've already lost them and you're out of luck. And then you need a flat blade screwdriver to tighten up the screw to tighten the chain on the other side, and then retighten your chain guard with the 10mm. Look, it's not a complex process, but for a consumer grade saw, for people that aren't used to using hand tools, that's a couple of steps. Moving to the Stihl, we've got the most rudimentary of the tightening devices. You simply unscrew this plastic nut, a couple of screws, pull on the bar as tight as you feel, a measurement of about that, and then tighten the plastic screw back up again. You've now tightened the chain. The most sophisticated of the three saws in terms of chain tensioning is actually the little Keb Tech here. If we undo this plastic bezel here a couple of turns, the bar automatically tensions itself under a spring load, and then all we have to do is do the bezel back up again, and we've tensioned our chain. Let's take the side cover off and I'll explain how this works. Inside, you've still got the standard plastic guide that you see on all of these saws and a screw to attach the side cover. But this little pin here is actually mounted on a spring, and if I push back against it, it immediately springs back into position and tensions the chain exactly correctly. So no more guesstimating with your thumb. Chain tension. All you have to do is undo the bezel a couple of turns and the saw automatically tensions itself. Now, these are small consumer saws and they're tiny, but they're chainsaws nonetheless, and chainsaws can be a little bit dangerous, so let's talk safety. The Ryobi doesn't have many safety features, doesn't have many safety guards, no kickback control, anything like that. But if you're using this thing as recommended, it's 2 meters away from you on a pole. So if it kicks back a little bit, that's really not of a concern. So we'll forget about that. Next up, we've got the Stihl. Now the Stihl has this little sort of scissor cover on it. Now the idea of that is they actually recommend that you put your second hand on top of the cover of the motor while you're using it. So I suppose if you slip forward, you're not going to hit the chain. But the other thing is, it comes to the end of the bar, so it's effectively covering your kickback zone. So it's not allowing people to put the bar underneath things and have it kick back on them. So it's a reasonably well-designed, spring-loaded, protective cover. So that's safety with the Stihl. The Keb Tech has, I suppose, a copy of that idea, but it's smaller. It doesn't cover all of the bar. In fact, you'll see that the top quarter of the front of the top of the bar is not covered. That's actually what we refer to as the kickback zone. If this comes into contact with a stick or something like that, there is a chance that it will spin backwards like that because of the centripetal force of the chain. For me, not a concern, but for the consumers that are buying this product, I would encourage Keb Tech to make their guard more like the Stihl. Bring it to the end of the bar, and that would be a lot safer with people that are not familiar with using chainsaws and the reality of kickback. Weight-wise, with the battery in both saws, if we hang up the Stihl, we get a weight of 1.5 kilos, so 1.5 kilos. Now, if we hang up the Keb Tech with the battery in, we get a weight of 900 grams. So the Keb Tech is nearly half the weight of the Stihl. And if you're carrying this around in your pocket, you'll probably notice that. Well, after a couple of hours of fun cutting stuff up, which saw would I spend my money on? Well, Stihl have recently reduced their price of this particular saw online to be competitive with the Keb Tech. So it's going to come down to what I've had a look at in this review, not price. For my money, if I was spending it, I'm going to be very attracted to the fact that this is half the weight, has more power, gets double the batteries, and has a longer bar. One thing that does concern me with the Keb Tech is the chain quality. I think it's been supplied with a lower quality chain than is on the Stihl at the moment because it's required a lot more adjusting during use than the Stihl has. However, a trip to my local mower shop and a decent set of chains should sort that out. So for my money, I'm going to go the Keb Tech for this review. Guys, if you found that useful, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, give it a thumbs up. Plenty more on timthompson.ag, and I'll see you next week where we'll hopefully cut up something else.